all, warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today in this exciting moment to discuss the key insights into the new, fresh edition of the Off-Grid Solar Market Trends Report, which actually is being readied for the publication as we speak. So you will also receive soon the report. The webinar will consist of 3 parts. We will start with the headline trend presentation, which will give you the overview of the main findings of the report, which will follow by a panel discussion with panelists that are representing the whole spectrum of the off-grid solar sector, so companies, financiers, governments, as well as enabling actors. And there will be about 25 minutes. And then for the last 25 minutes, we really want to make sure that we have enough time for the Q&A so that you have an opportunity to ask your questions. And you can do it via the Q&A box. So you should see the Q&A box on your screen. And you can either ask general question or you can direct the questions to individual panelists. And in addition, you can upvote each other's questions. And the session will be recorded and shared afterwards. And finally, if you're experiencing any problems, you can let us know in the chat and we will see if we're able to help. So now we can start fully. My name is Dana Ryšánková, and I am a lead energy specialist at the World Bank working primarily on energy access. And I'm representing ESMAP here, which is one of the main co-authors of the Market Trends Report. So just to give you a little bit overview of what this is about, this report is the latest in the series of reports that we publish every 2 years as a collaboration of the World Bank under the leadership of ESMAP and the Lighting Global program, IFC, GOGLA, and additional partners. And this year, the partners include also Open Capital Advisors and Efficiency for Access Coalition. So the series actually go way back to 2010, when really there was no market yet and there were no trends to discuss yet, but there was an opportunity that we highlighted at the time, and that opportunity then got started to realize, and this is where we are today. And since then, every 2 years, we go back and reflect about where we are, where we're going, what trends are emerging, and which of them really matter for the sector, and what needs to be done for the sector to fully realize its potential. So these reports really are collective work across partners, but more important than that, they are also a reflection of our collective knowledge of the whole sector at each moment when they're published. And therefore, it's no surprise that as the sector is growing and is getting more sophisticated, so are these reports. To the point that actually this year, we decided to break the report into 2 parts. So we have the status of the sector, which is what we're discussing today. And then we will have the outlook, which is the forward-looking part, which focuses on the role of the off-grid solar sector to achieve SDG 7, which will be ready for you at the next Global Off-Grid Solar Forum in Kigali next month. So, and it's not just the report size that increased, it's also the scope, the product scope has also increased. The product scope traditionally in the MTR was solar energy kits. So it was lanterns, multi-light systems, and solar home systems, including household appliances. But already in the last report, we highlighted the emerging importance of the productive use systems and appliances. And it is great to let you know that actually in this report, we are including a substantive focus on productive uses of energy. And this is also why we are partnering with the Efficiency for Access Coalition. I should also say that we do not aspire to capture every trend and every change from the past, but we really want to identify, deep dive, and reflect on those trends that really matter for the future of the sector. And this is, I would say this is really especially relevant in this year's edition, as this is the first time, this is the first report that is coming after COVID. So, you know, actually the last Market Trends Report that was released at the Nairobi forum, and that was in February 2020. And I think many of us who are joining this webinar actually were at the forum, and obviously we had no idea how profoundly different the world will be just a month later. So this is really our first opportunity to reflect where we are 2.5 years after the COVID broke, and where is the sector, right? What does that mean for the sector? So with that, I am turning the mic over to Chef from GOGLA and Harry from OCA, who will present the headline trends.
Thank you, Dana, and hi everyone, glad you can join us. My name is Chef Ketelaar, Senior Insights Manager at GOGLA, and together with Harry Masters, Principal from Open Capital Advisors, we will run you through some of the key trends highlighted in the report before we move to the panel discussion. I will first touch on the global electrification opportunity and challenges and the impact of off-grid solar. After that, I will hand over to Harry, who will take us through global sales, investment, and company performance. Harry will then hand over back to me, and I will close by taking a look at trends affecting competition in the sector, technological innovations, and enabling environment. A small warning up front. This will be a quite dense presentation, as we want to provide you with a good overview of the key trends in a short amount of time. So please bear with us. Luckily, we have a great panel to help us digest all this information. And of course, you can watch this recording later or consult the report. So yeah, without further ado, I suggest we dive right in. In 2020, over 700 million people were still living without access to electricity, of which over 80% were in rural areas. While this number has steadily fallen over the past decade, analysis based on SDG 7 tracking data shows that at the current electrification rate, it will still take at least 17 years to reach everyone with Tier 1 energy access or a basic solar home system. Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 77% of the current electricity access gap. As you can see in this graph, most countries in Sub-Saharan Africa still have an access gap of at least 2 million people, with Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia accounting for 30% of those without access. Some countries are closing their electricity access deficit relatively quickly. For example, Ethiopia narrowed this gap from 71% in 2015 to 49% in 2020. However, progress has been much slower in DRC, with the deficit reducing only slightly from 84% to 81% over the same period. Electrification has expanded quickly in some South Asian countries, but also in this region, many people remain without access. India's rate of electrification rose from 88% in 2015 to 99% in 2020, but over 10 million people still lack access. What is more is that around half of the unconnected households live in countries with nascent off-grid solar markets with little commercial activity. We will touch on this later as well, but these countries typically have underdeveloped policy frameworks, poor infrastructure, and in many cases are affected by conflict. And this poses additional challenges to the deployment of off-grid solar technologies, and these challenges might increase due to climate and economic pressures. In closing this gap, solar energy kits, which include solar lanterns, multi-light systems, and solar home systems, remain the most cost-effective solution to electrify hundreds of millions of off-grid households and businesses. But the ability to pay is a big challenge. So first, what you see here on the left, on the bottom, is that our analysis shows that OGS technologies are estimated to be the most cost-effective and feasible solution for 55% of new household connections between 2020 and 2025, as OGS technologies are able to expand faster than the main grid or mini grids in the short term. On the right, you see that by 2030, the share of mini grid and grid connections is expected to expand or to increase, but OGS is still expected to account for 41% of all connections realized. However, the ultimate share of the grid, mini grid, and OGS in the electrification mix of 2030 will not depend only on the least cost pathway, but also on how fast these technologies are able to expand. So for example, when the grid expands, some of the households initially using solar energy kits may partly or fully transition to a grid or mini grid connection. But even then, OGS products can still play an important role as a secondary source of electricity, as there will also be the need and market opportunity for solar energy kits and appliances to be deployed alongside the grid or mini grids, in particular for households facing grid reliability issues. And I will touch on that later as well. That said, even though solar energy kits are the least cost way to electrify hundreds of millions of households, the ability to pay remains a real challenge. And to provide an indication, we conducted an analysis on the global ability to pay for off-grid solar solutions. A full methodology can be found in the report. But what we did was look at two different income distributions, so two extremes, if you will. One that assumes that the unelectrified population is concentrated in the poorest strata of the population, or the so-called BOP demand, and one where we assume that the currently unconnected households are evenly distributed across all income strata, or the nationwide income demand. And what you see here in this table is that if we assume that the unelectrified population is concentrated in the poorest income strata of the overall population, 456 of the currently 733 million unserved people will be able to afford a tier 1 solar energy kit or a basic solar home system on pay-go. However, if customers are facing the full cash price upfront, this number drops to only 3 million people. If we assume that the currently unconnected households are evenly distributed across all income strata, so the nationwide income demand, the number of people that can afford a tier 1 solar energy kit on pay-go increases to 556 million people and to 167 million people on a cash basis. So this indicates that end user finance is essential to provide the poorest population with tier 1 energy access, but that pay-go alone is not sufficient to close the affordability gap. However, it's unlikely that end user finance will be deployed for all households, especially given that many live in fragile and conflict affected states. In addition, affordability may also be more limited than previously thought, as the ability to pay among the poorest communities may be lower than estimated, or could worsen. As we all know, the pandemic has resulted in job losses in already vulnerable communities. And overall, it's estimated that COVID-19 pushed 100 million people into extreme poverty in 2020 alone. The global energy and food security crisis caused by the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the rising inflation, also leads to continued financial pressure on low-income households. And the World Bank expects that it will push millions more people into poverty and will create a debt crisis for some countries. So this is a bit of a bleak picture, but there's also good news, and that is that the number of people accessing solar energy kits has grown from 420 million people in 2019 to over 490 million people by the end of 2021. What we also see is that the number of people gaining higher tier 2 levels of access, or higher capacity solar home systems, increased by 160%. And this is a result of ongoing sales, a longer lifespan of larger products, and also current customers that are beginning to move up the so-called clean energy staircase. In many cases, customers move up the staircase when they've paid off or made savings from their initial solar energy kit, and are able to then purchase new, often larger products or additional services. In addition to providing clean energy access, OGS products are also demonstrating benefits that help achieve a further 10 SDGs and support people in adapting and becoming more resilient to climate change. Although the industry has not yet developed a standard framework to fully capture and monitor its contribution to climate adaptation and resilience, it is clear that OGS provides positive opportunities. Research shows, for example, that at least 370,000 jobs have been created in the industry, and an estimated 10 million enterprises are currently powered by OGS solutions. 1,000 solar water pumps are used to provide fresh, clean water, and 96% of farmers across 6 countries report an increase in productivity since using their solar water pump. Millions of people can stay better connected via phone, radio, TV, and internet, and almost 1/3 of solar home system customers in East Africa reported that their system helped them to increase their income, making it easier for those households to withstand shocks. Off-grid solar also has significant mitigation benefits. So for example, replacing kerosene lanterns with solar lighting has already avoided an estimated 190 million tons of CO2e. That's equivalent to taking 51 coal-fired power plants offline for a full year. And all of this showcases that OGS plays a very important role in achieving a faster and more just clean energy transition, both through the use of lighting products and appliances. And with that, I would like to hand over to Harry. Harry, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Chef. And thanks as well to everybody that's joined us here today and everyone that's also contributed to this report and getting it to the point that it is at today. So as Chef mentioned, I'm going to cover a few areas. This includes trends and sales for the sector, investment and funding, as well as company performance. So as in past versions of the market trends report, we wanted to assess what the trends are in sales over the past few years and contextualize those trends in the overall arc of the sector's lifetime. Of course, COVID-19 heavily impacted the sector over the last couple of years, and we wanted to talk a little bit more about what those trends are here. Next slide, please. So as you can see on this slide here, the industry experienced a pretty steep downturn as a result of the pandemic. So you see sales for solar energy kits, they're plotted on this graph here on an annual basis. And from 2019 to 2020, those sales declined 22%. But since have recovered by 10% from 2020 to 2021, which shows some signs of a recovery here. Much of this rebound is caused by the sales of solar lanterns as well as multi-light systems. Just important to note. Also, we saw some regional trends as far as sales are concerned. This includes slowdowns in South Asia and some more mature East Africa markets, and also growth in several West and Central Africa markets too. In terms of business models, both cash and pay-go sales volumes declined during the pandemic, but the pay-go business model in particular has shown a high level of resilience and has already returned to a growth trajectory. Next slide, please. As Donna mentioned, we wanted to look a little bit closer at appliances, including both productive use of energy and otherwise. And this includes TVs, fans, solar water pumps, and fridges. And what we can see here, the data reporting hasn't lasted or hasn't been ongoing for as long as the solar energy kit, but we can see that in pre-pandemic years, the segment of the sector saw high growth rates, largely driven by sales of household appliances like TVs and fans. Since 2019, however, aggregate sales for off-grid solar appliances have declined by 21% year on year, as the effects of the pandemic, of course, impacted across the sector. And we haven't seen the same return to growth as we have yet in solar energy kits. Next slide, please. So this report, as with previous reports, also estimates the total market value in terms of turnover. This is now estimated at a total of $2.8 billion annually, with a $2.1 billion market for solar energy kits and a $0.7 billion market for appliances. As with sales volumes, the value of sales has increased since 2020, though at a slightly lower rate than sales volumes. And that's due to the shift in the sales mix towards some lower cost lanterns and multi-light systems as the sector has recovered and in line with some reduced incomes for consumers in the sector. Cash sales for solar home systems in particular remain depressed. Next slide, please. So this report also looked at where sales were occurring and compared them against where sales still need to occur if we hope to achieve the development goals, particularly around SDG 7. Next slide, please. So this report categorizes country-level markets into 4 different categories based on factors that include sales in these countries, sector growth, potential market. And as you can see in the left 2 graphs here, there are large portions of the population in what are characterized as nascent and emerging markets that still remain to be electrified. But sales have heavily lagged in these markets compared to, say, mature and peaked markets. In nascent markets in particular, we've seen just 2 million unit sales have reached those markets since 2016, representing just 5% of sales by affiliate companies. But these countries account for 41% of the electrification need, with the majority of them being best served by off-grid solar products. It's important to note too that though mature and peak markets have a much smaller population yet to be electrified, there's still a crucial role for off-grid solar to ensure that no one is left behind. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we also wanted to cover trends in investment here. The main headline, as at this point, is that cumulative investment has now reached over $2.3 billion since 2012. Next slide, please. As you'll see here, investment levels on a per year basis plateaued for a number of years. And then from 2020 to 2021, we saw an increase of 44%, reaching a total of $457 million that year. This was largely driven by large debt investments for some of the largest companies, and 2022 is looking to be a strong year for investment as well. It's important to note that in 2021, 10% of the investment volumes went to productive use of energy companies specifically, showing a shift in the sector. Next slide, please. And one thing that has been mentioned before, but it's, I think, become clearer than ever, is that there's a bifurcation of companies in the sector along the lines of how much funding has reached various companies. So on the left-hand side here, you can see what we've referred to as scale-up companies. These are the 7 companies that have received the top 7 amount of funding in the sector, each of them having raised over $100 million each. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what we've referred to as seed and startup companies. They've attracted much lower volumes of capital, both in terms of aggregate amounts as well as on a per company basis. To give a perspective here, we've recorded transactions for over 150 companies that are reflected on the right-hand side of the graph here. So to sum that all up, 72% of current industry investment has been directed to the 7 scale-up companies as listed on the left-hand side, with a balance to other companies in the sector. Next slide, please. The report also sought to understand the outlook for investment in the sector. So one thing that came out clearly was that despite the downturn, investors continue to see potential in the sector. So some investors saw increasing levels of underperformance for off-grid solar companies compared to other sectors in their portfolio. They expect these to be resolved by the end of this year, 2022. And also, a majority of investor surveys expect to maintain current levels of investment activity in the sector, or even increase their investments in the sector, which points again to a short-term outlook being positive for investment in off-grid solar. Next slide. Beyond private sector investment, there is also further recognition across stakeholder groups that public funding will be much needed for the sector as it aims to support various sustainable development goals. Next slide. In particular, interest in using results-based financing, or RBF, to reach customers and scale markets continues to grow. Since 2013, $211 million has been dispersed or is currently being dispersed to the sector. Importantly, over $100 million of that amount came on stream in 2022 alone. These are being used for a growing number of applications, from helping scale up quality verified products to reaching marginalized customers to driving uptake of emerging technologies. Beyond RBF as a mechanism, stakeholders are also better understanding the growing affordability gap for users, and this is driving increase in end user subsidies. And Chef touched previously on kind of the quantification around some of that need earlier. And while there's some risk that end user subsidies have the potential to distort commercial markets, they have in recent years shown through a number of pilots and programs that they can successfully reach low income households where otherwise commercial markets wouldn't, which is quite promising in pursuit of those development goals. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, some areas in the sector have proven quite resilient, but many companies did struggle during the pandemic, particularly those with weaker cash positions. Next slide. We mentioned pay-as-you-go specifically as a main driver of sales in the sector, particularly for affiliate companies. And as you can see here in 2021, as the sector was rebounding, pay-go represented 36% of the sales volumes. But in the same period, it was accounted for 3/4 of the total market value for the sector, showing the importance of this business model for companies in off-grid solar. Next slide. Still, of course, pay-go comes with its own risks. Surveys show that there have been a decline in receivables portfolio quality over the years coinciding with the pandemic, which has a negative impact, of course, on company financial performance. But all that being said, there are indeed high-performing companies still with good quality portfolios that offer success stories for the sector. And also, there was some data gathered around company performance, and a handful of companies have reported being fully profitable and others at varying degrees of profitability, which is a very positive development for the sector. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Chef.
Yes, thanks, Harry. Yeah, indeed, many companies struggled during the pandemic, which increased the pressure to implement clear paths to profitability. To cut costs and optimize business models, companies continue to outsource niche, non-strategic functions and digitalize operations. A few years ago, the sector trended away from vertically integrated companies into specialized OGS companies focusing on a few segments of the value chain, such as distribution and financing, allowing for more partnerships across the sector. As a next step in market maturity, we now see a rise in non-OGS companies providing specialized services to the sector. And this trend, seen primarily in mature markets, is allowing OGS companies to increase their operational efficiency and focus on growing core business functions. So we see, for example, companies outsourcing their after-sales services, such as installation, repair, and maintenance, but also payment collection. What we also see is that companies across different markets move into beyond energy products and services to diversify their income streams. Companies are, for example, integrating pay-go technology in more devices, such as smartphones, laptops, electric cook stoves, but also biodigesters and electric vehicles. Furthermore, pay-go companies' data infrastructure, the credit risk algorithms, and software platforms enable them to offer a range of financial products, such as small business loans, school loans, and health insurance. Large pay-go players have also invested quite heavily in recent years to build the technology and teams to enable this expansion, and further innovation driven by advancements in data infrastructure and analytics are on the horizon. So, for example, we see companies partnering with insurance agencies to pilot innovative agricultural insurance products for solar home system customers. One example is that of a company which provides smallholder farmers a so-called payment holiday on their solar home system in case of a severe drought. And these kind of innovations offer the potential to make the sector more impactful, but also more resilient to climate change. While companies are starting to sell beyond energy products, we see that product offering of solar energy kits continues to grow. The number of quality verified or Verisol certified solar lanterns and solar home systems increased from 201 products from 51 brands in 2019 to 261 products from 67 brands in 2021. What is more is that solar home systems are increasingly sold with appliances, and there have been rapid advancements in the maturity of a few appliances and productive use technologies. But more research and development investment is needed to accelerate a wider array of technology onto the market. To pick a few, solar water pumps, seen as an emerging technology 2 years ago, are now classified as near to market, with 42 products from 21 brands being quality tested, and there are many hundred more that are available on the market. This is also the case for solar cooling, followed some intensive R&D efforts due to the increased demand for vaccine storage and the high potential for productive use. We see 95 fridges from 50 brands have been quality tested today. And again, there are many more, 100 more that are available on the market. The market for small-scale milling remains nascent, although there are some very promising examples, and e-mobility products are now seen to be emerging, with two-wheel and three-wheel vehicles being the fastest growing form of transport in emerging markets due to their small size and relative affordability. I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation that there will likely be a need and market opportunity for solar energy kits and appliances to be deployed alongside the grid or mini grids. And off-grid solar has the potential to improve electricity access not only in off-grid areas, but also for an estimated 775 million people living with a weak grid connection. The electricity supply for weak grid customers is typically inadequate, unavailable, unreliable, and also unsafe. Although the quality of supply varies significantly. Some areas only experience minimal disruptions, whereas others only have a few hours of power per day. And this particularly constrains businesses from investing in appliances and machinery, since their ability to use them reliably for income generation is hindered. And what is more is that weak grid customers are often forced to rely on backup technologies that are often polluting and expensive. Diesel generators are often used as a backup technology. And in Nigeria alone, there are an estimated 22 million small petrol generators being used to power homes and small businesses. And this is 8 times the grid's peak capacity. So even though it's still a complicated and fragmented market, we see new technology segments emerging that integrate distributed solar and storage with the weak grid to improve the quality and affordability of electricity access. And here you see 4 segments with high potential. And basically, the battery is charged by the grid and or the solar panel and provides power to the loads during the grid outage. There's also an emerging class of smart lights and appliances that have inbuilt batteries that can continue working during outages, and appliances that work on both direct current from solar and alternate current from the grid. Digital technology is a key feature here, with Internet of Things or IoT system monitoring and management. And if deployed at scale, the distributed solar and storage solutions could transform electricity networks into smart grids in the future. I will end with some key trends on the policy front and enabling environment. First, governments are increasingly embracing OGS as a viable energy access solution. Many governments are including off-grid solar in their integrated electrification plans alongside the national grid and mini grids. And at least 12 countries completed their plans in the last 2 years. However, we also see that only a few governments are adopting and implementing their integrated plans at a pace that matches their SDG 7 ambitions. And this is often due to limited institutional, financial, or technical capacity, and or a lack of a strong regulatory framework. That said, many governments have increased their efforts to support the deployment of OGS technologies and the scale-up of off-grid solar markets in their countries. And in the past few years, we especially see an increased interest in powering healthcare and climate-smart agriculture, also among development partners. The World Bank Lighting Global program, for example, has expanded its remit to include productive use of technologies such as solar water pumps, mills, and sewing machines. The World Bank also supports electrification of public health centers and schools. And as World Bank's activities are driven by government demand, this illustrates this evolving interest from national government leaders. This graph here shows that between July 2015 and June 2022, the World Bank programs, which include OGS, have been approved in more than 3/4 of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Including technical assistance, the total amount committed since July 2015 is $2 billion. And of this $2 billion, more than $470 million in specific support for OGS and $160 million in related technical assistance has been approved since 2020. Other development partners have also broadened their scope and or continued their support for healthcare electrification and PUE products. For example, in 2022, Power Africa announced a new public and private sector alliance that plans to electrify 10,000 healthcare facilities in sub-Saharan Africa, while NDEF and IKEA Foundation launched a 3-year sustainable energy for smallholder farmers program worth $8.1 million in 2021 to increase the use of productive use appliances in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Lastly, I want to finish with highlighting that given the millions of OGS products that have been sold over the last decade, there are concerns on the appropriate handling and disposal of e-waste, which have emerged among governments and the broader industry. Only a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including Rwanda, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, have e-waste management facilities that are equipped to handle end-of-life products from off-grid solar and cross-boundary yeah, from off-grid solar, and cross-boundary movement is often expensive and complex. However, what is promising to see is that several countries, in addition to promoting quality standards, have started to develop or strengthen their existing waste management laws and regulations. And this means that in the future, companies will likely increasingly need to plan for e-waste regulation and to build it into their operation plans and processes. And with that, I would like to hand over to Dana and the panel. Dana, over to you.
Thank you, Chef and Harry, for this excellent and thought-provoking presentation. And now I would like to turn to the panel to give us their thoughts about how these trends resonate with their experience of the last 2.5 years. And just as a reminder, please put your questions to the panel into the Q&A tab, and I will bring them in. So introducing the panel, we have Mr. Jetani, who is representing the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of India. We have Tobias Ruckstuhl from Persistent Energy, representing an investor in the sector. Mansoor Hamayan from BBox, representing an off-grid solar company. And Makena Ireri from Efficiency for Access Coalition, representing one of the enabling actors. And I will ask each of you just a very short reflections for a few questions that I will ask you. So starting with Mansoor, you just heard the headline trends, and how do they resonate with what has been the BBox experience over the last 2 years? What is new for you? And what are the external factors and trends that affected your company in a positive or a negative way? And above all, what do you think about the future? Are you optimistic?
Thanks, Dana, and thanks, team, for preparing such a great report once again. I think maybe highlighting a few challenges first, maybe that wasn't mentioned on the report, is once COVID really struck, the main challenge that we as a company faced, and I'm sure as a sector as a large, was supply chain. A lot of the supply chain is related to China, and China had a quite aggressive lockdowns, and that resulted in quite a massive disruption in the ability to produce, ability to get supplies. So I think many companies in 2021 in particular were limited by just how much they could get access to in terms of physical product and not the demand. So I think for the first time after a long time, it was really driven not by financing constraint as a sector, but it was driven by supply constraint in the sector. So I think that was one of the big things that we definitely noticed. The other thing we also noticed was that the impact of COVID in terms of both sales performance and portfolio performance was very uneven across our different operating countries. We operate in 10 countries at the moment. So in some countries, actually, we saw a massive increase in demand. We saw a massive increase in improvement, a massive meaning quite a substantial improvement in portfolio quality for whatever set of reasons. And I think in other countries, we didn't see that at all. We saw a deterioration of portfolio quality, and also reduction in the average size of systems sold, which is a sort of an indicator of people's ability to pay. I'm not an economist, but I'm going to guess that has something to relate to individual countries' response to COVID and the fiscal and financial sort of strategies that they took to be able to mitigate such effect as well. So I think those were the sort of the two big challenges, because means that planning becomes really difficult in terms of how much can we actually get access to, and what will a midterm customer behavior look like in market X or Y or Z, right? So planning became quite difficult. On the flip side, I think one of the big recognitions, and I think a lot of that is due to the efforts by this team here, is that off-grid solar was seen as a critical part of the solution of protecting during the era of COVID, and also now it's become mainstream in terms, if I may say so now, in terms inside energy ministries across Africa in particular, where we operate. And I think that's reflected in that realization that subsidies are needed to be able to not just protect people's ability and from an energy security perspective, but it's needed to be able to actually accelerate energy access in the country. And there's been quite a tremendous growth of that. And I think that is what's related to still a massive growth in demand, right? So the sales growth that we are seeing that was just presented right now, I'm willing to bet good money that has a lot to do with the increased subsidies that has now flown into the market that's helping more affordability to take place. But then again, if I talk about some of the challenges as well, is that for the first time, we're also seeing a reverse of trends, which was not really mentioned in the report here. Generally speaking now, if you just look at it from without sort of interventions, in the last 10 years, we've operated the company, we've had the trend that product prices have become lower and lower. And in general, African households, and I speak about Africa as we operate mostly in Africa, households have become richer and richer. That's been the general trend. I think for the first time, we're seeing a trend in reverse at this moment in time, where inflation of product or product costs are definitely increasing. And there are signs that household incomes are tightening, right? So there's a reversal of trend there. And I think we need to potentially rethink about how subsidies and government and private sector and other sort of stakeholders work together to make sure we protect what has been built, but we also can carry on what's needed to be able to hit SDG 7. Last 2 points, and I'll shut up, I promise. Around underserved markets, one of the things that BBox definitely did during this period was to keep our expansion on. So we expanded into Burkina Faso as an example, because we saw it as extremely underserved, but also because the right subsidy schemes and right sort of multilateral sort of coordination came into the market, where we thought that this would be the right way to actually enter the market. So again, the public sector and government putting policies in place that make it attractive, make it quite interesting for companies like BBox to enter the market. And we also see this. I think there was some sort of mention about small companies versus bigger companies, and we definitely are seeing more consolidation in the market right now. The source of funding for maybe smaller companies are not funds and institutions, but it's the larger companies buying up or investing into the smaller peers in our market. So we just did an acquisition, for example, of a company called PEG Africa in 4 countries: Ivory Coast, Senegal, Mali, and Ghana, for that exact reason, because it's an aspect of expanding. Last thing, I really like that slide about pay-go everything. Actually, it's very interesting where that comes from. It comes from the fact that we have now, as a sector, some of us have had customers for over 5 years. And those customers are becoming demanding. They want more. They want fridges, they want e-bikes, they want cash loans, they want water pumps, they want more. So a lot of that is actually driven by the customer voice. And if you run a pay-as-you-go company, you're in active contact with your customer. They only pay you if they like you. So that means that the customer voice is becoming really strong, I think, inside the sector, which I think is really positive, which is driving a lot of that growth of new products and services. So that's also a difference in sort of design thinking inside, I think, our sector than what was 5-6 years ago. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much. That was a very rich answer. And so just for me, I guess what I'm taking from it is, it's very interesting, right? That the COVID obviously affected the sector in a negative way, but there are also some positive aspects to it. And one of them that you mentioned is that maybe this realization how energy access is important has become stronger, and that has led also to the governments to take more action. And I also like your last point that somehow what we see, right, over the years now, that the customer's voice is becoming stronger. So going back to that importance of the government action, we have the one representative of the government with us, and that's Mr. Jatani from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of India. And I'd like to ask you, Actually, the India case is very interesting because India has recently achieved nearly universal access, but yet it's a really still important market for the off-grid solar sector, actually the second largest after Kenya. And so what do you see the role of off-grid solar sector moving forward in India? For example, in the report, we have heard that actually many customers are acquiring off-grid solar sector to complement their grid service. Do you from the ministry perspective, do you see the value in this? And what's your recommendation to off-grid solar companies that are operating in India?
Yeah. So as my previous speaker, Mansoor, has said that now the consumer voice is there and they are demanding more. So that is very true in India also. In 2015, when the new government came in, they declared that within 1,000 days, we are going to have the universal access of electricity. And that was achieved in April 2018. And thereafter, we took another initiative to electrify all the households. Earlier, it was village electrification and then household electrification. So that was also achieved in 2021 itself, where all the households, those who are willing to take the electricity connection has been connected. Some of them were connected through the solar systems because the grid availability of that point of time may not be technically or financially feasible. So they were connected through the solar. Now, when they have got the electricity, they could realize what is the use of electricity, and now they are demanding more, what Mr. Mansoor has said. There are certain pockets where the reliability of electricity is not good, and there we are providing the off-grid solutions, and we are not constraining having constraint up to the household consumption. No, I think we have to go beyond, because now we have to look after how we can provide them livelihood activities. Otherwise, how they can pay? As you are saying that in slides, I understand that the pay and go as they are declining, the revenue is declining. So if people will earn, then only they can pay. So we have to see how their economic activities can be developed through providing the energy access through solar or some other sources, where the grid connectivity is not safe, is not reliable. So we are taking care of that. And during February 2000 this year, we have issued a policy on decentralized renewable energy application, livelihood applications. So what is happening in countries, of course, there may be some in other countries also. We have different ministries working in different areas, like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Tribal Affairs is there, Ministry of Minority Affairs is there, then Ministry of Rural Development is there, Ministry of Panchayati Raj there, and Ministry of Agriculture is there. So they are also promoting the renewable application in some or different ways. So different ministries are working in different ways, and they are promoting. And Indian people are very innovative. So they know that I have to do this work and how I can achieve this work. So they use some of the other techniques to complete the work. So with that, they can convince the concerned ministry that, look, if it is a farmer who wants to run his pump, so he will say that I'm going to run this pump through the solar. And now I am going to use this solar panel also for my other activities, like as a shaft cutter or a thresher or any other activity, like for battery charging or running a cold storage like that. So these ministries are working and providing different solutions through different schemes. So to converge all the schemes and provide a standard solution and quality control. So in off-grid solution, what is happening, that the efficiency matters, because if the efficiency is going to increase, then your requirement of energy will go down and your cost will go down. So efficiency matters, its robustness, because these systems are being deployed in the rural areas where the repair and maintenance may be an issue. So your system should be efficient, it should be robust, it should be reliable, needing less R&M, repair and maintenance. So we are working on all these aspects: quality control, standardization, then public awareness. Now, since the electrification has reached to all the villages, all the household, now people are using the mobile. Now they are understanding what are the different options available. They are exploring more. So then their demand is increasing. So their demand is increasing, then they need things at their doorsteps. So they want government to provide all these things and support them. For this, as I said, the DRE policy we have declared. And now we are working on a larger scheme wherein we can provide some kind of support to all these applications. One of the major issue what we have observed is the finance. Finance is one of the major obstacle. So how that finance need can be catered through some subsidy support, of course, that is one option, but subsidy can't be given for everything. We have the limited resources. Another option could be encourage the banks to finance. So banks are saying that our credit risk guarantee should be ensured. So that part could be taken care of, or some kind of interest subvention can be provided. So we are all working on all these aspects and different solutions available for different activities. Like in Kashmir area, where the apricots and other things are being produced. So solar dryer is one of the good option, so that they can use the solar dryer to their food processing and other activities, and they can prevent their produce from the destroying due to perishable, all these things. Similarly, in the northeastern area where the turmeric and other produce are there, they can use the solar dryer or food processing equipment, and then they can increase their income. Solar cold storage is there, one of the options available. Apart from the solar, we are also taking care of the other renewable energy. It could be a biogas, it could be a small windmill, or small mini or micro hydel, where in hilly areas we have the streams available, water streams are there, and you can run all these equipment. So all these equipments we are taking care of, and we are coming out of with a very big scheme to support all these applications, particularly for the livelihood, because we understand people, until unless you increase their income, the living standard will not grow. So to
Mr. Jatani, maybe I'll stop you here, and we'll maybe come back to you for the rest, because you just made a very important point. And I think what's really interesting is that obviously many countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, they're still striving to achieve this 100% electrification that you have achieved in India, but it's not the end, right? And I think you made an important point that still what matters are few things. It's not just access, it's the reliable access, but also it's how the electricity is being used and how the electricity can really support the livelihoods. And that's a very, very important point that I would like to actually ask McKenna to maybe give us a few thoughts about this, because what we have seen really recently, and you're bringing it up as well, is the rapid advancement in the maturity of productive use technologies. You mentioned cold storage, for example. So McKenna, can you tell us a little more what do you think is driving this? How is it possible that we have seen in the recent years so much progress in this area, and what can we expect in the near term?
Thank you so much, Dana. I think first of all, there's been a concentration of effort and programmatic and donor funding into productive use, not least of all, for example, the launch of the Efficiency for Access Coalition 5 years ago. And I think that has concentrated us on appliances and productive use and allowed us to kind of put funding dedicated to these technologies. But beyond that, the mechanism that we've used to actually accelerate the technologies are, for example, R&D. There's a lot of grant funding that has gone into research and development of productive uses. Some of our grantees report remarkable reduction in, for example, costs of production of the actual equipment. And this is from, having some grant funding to put through measures that would increase efficiency, for example, or reduce component costs. And so, for example, the coalition has launched nearly £5 million in R&D funding, and we think this has really pushed the technologies beyond where they were a few years ago. We mentioned testing. The report notes the acceleration in the number of products that are being tested now and whose data is being shared publicly on Verasol. And this is really important to grow a product from something that's just a prototype and is nascent to something that is mature and is available for the market, because it can be now benchmarked against what is existing, and quality can be guaranteed, performance can be guaranteed, and also durability. And so that's really an important marker for maturity of these technologies. I think we've also gone into a place where we are having these solution-oriented working groups. A lot of them put together by folks who are on this call, World Bank, the Efficiency for Access Coalition, SNV, and these working groups are focusing on technologies and solutions. For the first time, I think maybe bringing together solution providers and technology manufacturers to think through what is common, what are they trying to achieve in common and not necessarily in competition, and to solve for that. We're also learning a lot of lessons that are being brought back into lessons learned working groups and that are helping companies to accelerate their learning much faster. I think also information, data, pilots are really helpful. The market trends report, the state of the off-grid appliance market report as well, and other technology-focused reports are giving companies the data they need to access new market and therefore can grow. They can grow their they can grow in this market and reinvest back into technologies. So I think that's really, really key. Having this information available, like what markets should we be targeting, what consumers should we be targeting. I think that also goes back into feeding into how we enhance the technology. And none of that is really possible without funding. I think we can all agree that funding undercuts all that. And really funding that is dedicated to innovation and learning, I think, is important, because then it's unrestricted from the commercial pressures that a lot of companies face in terms of how do they direct their funding. If they can have something that is kind of separate, doesn't have to kind of always fit into their commercial business, but allows them to experiment, to try, to test products in different environments with different consumers, then I think that is really, really important. And that's why a program like LEA is really helpful, right? Because it does that as a program for other programs, but also supporting companies to do that. And you also talked about, what can we expect in the near future? I think in terms of technology, we're going to see an expansion in the mature technology. So the solar water pumps, cold chains, we're going to see them moving into new markets, which is exciting. I mean, Mansoor talked about the acquisition of PEG by BBox. That's already kind of pushing into new markets and pushing those PUE. I think we're also going to see a concentration in cold chain technologies, people really paying attention to what solutions we can get there. Mr. Jatani really talked about how India is kind of at the forefront of that, but responding to the climate emergency and the food resilience emergencies, we have to really get into that, and we can see many of the folks in this panel who are contributing funding to that. I think the other thing is that the variety of technologies is going to expand, not only in different countries, but also in the scale. I think we've always been targeting one type of consumer, and now we're seeing people like experimenting with different scale, modular technologies that grows with the commercial as the consumer grows economically. We're also going to see a bit of interoperability that linked to the weak grid and how we can support both off and weak grid, I think is going to come to the fore, even in the appliances sector. And I think performance and quality is going to continue being a key factor to lean on, because otherwise, of course, we can't guarantee impact, we can't guarantee continued sales if we're not having quality products in the market. So I think that's where I see us moving in the near term.
Thanks, Makena. Obviously, it's a number of factors that still need to come in place, right, to see this segment to scale up, and it's great we see the beginnings of that. So one thing that you highlighted, and one thing that Mr. Jatani highlighted, and what's coming up also in the Q&A is the issue of financing. And maybe I'll just bring different questions together and turn to Tobias. So what's coming in the question from the audience is why do we see sort of more issues with financing, and particularly long-term low interest funding in Africa compared to, for example, what has been talked about in India? And in general, what we see in from the MTR report is that also the financing for the companies is still an issue, and especially the smaller, the startup companies have difficulty to get funded, and it's the early stage equity that's an issue, but also the debt, and as I have just mentioned, especially the long-term and affordable debt. So how do we solve this? Do you have any recommendations? What could be done?
Yeah, happy to give my thoughts, and I'll try and keep it short so we have enough time for other Q&A as well. I think a lot has been said that I can also combine. Obviously, as Persistent, we are an early stage investor in the space, so we have a clear view on it as well. I think it's important to just repeat a few of the general context that we're in, right? We have, obviously, as Dana, you've said, Mansoor has said, I think everyone has said, we are now already 2 years past kind of maybe not unprecedented, but still, a shock with the whole COVID pandemic that has just increased the uncertainty that already is persisting in many sub-Saharan geographies, right? I mean, there was and is already a high amount of uncertainty in various areas in, political, natural disasters, name it, in many sub-Saharan African countries. And the COVID pandemic has just added another layer of uncertainty. And I think it's important to acknowledge that's has been a new element, especially when it comes to equity. We now have a newer phenomenon that there's obviously quite the talk of down rounds of valuations coming under pressure, which generally does not help the space either. So I think there's a number of dynamics there at play that are just the overall ecosystem, and that we need to consider, and companies need to consider. So I think we can look at it from two angles, and I think both angles have something important to do. So I mean, it starts with the companies, the entrepreneurs themselves, or the sector, right? I think it's important that as a sector we can show successes, we can show exits. I think recently, the larger companies, GLP, Bbox, right, have shown a number of positive news again, which I think is really important for the sector overall. I think we also need strategic investors to engage or re-engage more again, and obviously there's a bit of an interplay there. But many strategics are already shareholders in some of the companies, and so I think having re-engagement there will be super important to just show confidence in the sector itself, right? Given the dynamics we've seen. I think maybe one note I wanted to make, Mansoor hinted at it already, with the supply chain being a massive issue. I think when we look at the sales, at least from my experience and from what we see as Persistent in the overall sector, it's important to remember that sales are not only driven by the customer demand, but also by the availability of product. And at least what we've seen this year, but also last year, is that in many cases, company could have sold more, but they didn't have product available. A mix of financing, so it goes a bit into the financing question again, but often also just general supply chain issues, lengthening supply chain. And I think that's important to keep in mind, and maybe also a story that needs to be told, right? That's not just all demand or lacking demand if we see sales that are maybe not as strong as we would have thought. But general quick advice, I think, it's important for companies and entrepreneurs to acknowledge this phase that we're in. So we need to prioritize profitability over growth. We need to show as companies that we can deal with that increased uncertainty and show what is possible, and that we can have these successes, and that we've learned as well from, it's still a very young sector, right? Just barely over 10 years old, that we've learned from that. I think when it comes to the lack of equity, I think that's still a fact, even if companies optimize how much equity they need by prioritizing profitability, which is also a lot easier said than done. I do think there is a need for a dedicated equity fund for the space, because we're not only talking of lacking equity early stage, but in general overall. And of course, if there's general lack of equity, makes it also difficult for early stage equity to come in that relies on equity being around also for the later growth phases. So I think in a way, I would say there is a bit of a call for a dedicated equity investment mandate for the sector, because obviously we've also seen in the last years quite a few funds that could have gone into the sector be deviated into other areas, be it e-mobility or be it the commercial and industrial space. And of course, that's also positive, also well-deserving sectors, but it's of course not the same. I think we do need to see that. Maybe a quick last 2 points on the debt that you mentioned. Personally, and from what we see, debt will follow equity. I think when the equity is there, the debt will follow. I think what has increased is the scrutiny on the amount of equity needed, giving some of the learnings of debt investors in the space. I think that's what many companies and entrepreneurs are facing, that debt investors are scrutinizing the levels of equity more, and that may be restricting the debt available. And so I think generally for especially younger stage, earlier stage companies, I think it's important to show what they've learned, think ahead, have a differentiated pitch, because I still see so many companies bringing the same pitch, that was pitched 10 years ago of the huge opportunity, right? And of course, there's a huge amount of households without access to energy, but of course, by now we also know more about it. We know it's maybe more difficult to access. We know about the availability to pay. And so I think it's important that the newest phase and stage of entrepreneurs can show that. So maybe I'll stop there. Obviously happy to add more comments also in the Q&A stage later, and or any follow-on questions from your end, Dana. Hope I've been able to offer a few elements of answers to the questions you have.
Thanks a lot, and certainly that's the case. We have lots of questions in the Q&A, and so I'll try to package some of them together. And also, please, for all the panelists, feel free to respond directly through Q&A, because we may not be able to answer all of them. So there are a few questions that maybe are more directed to Mansoor, and also are related to the question that I have. And Mansoor, you have alluded already that you started to really move towards some of the more nascent markets. And for me, one of the sort of striking data points that comes from the market trends report is that we're seeing this sort of divergence between where the off-grid markets are and where the people without electricity access are. The most of the people that actually need off-grid solar solutions are in the markets that just are not developed. So I'd like to get your views about what really can we do, and what do you need as a company, right, to go into these markets? And you have alluded to this a little bit about the need of public sector support, the subsidies. There's a question in the box how these subsidies should be directed. Is it better to direct them through the companies or directly to the consumers? So that's one thing that would be good if you can answer. The other one is also related to the fact that when we are looking into expanding into new products and new consumers to satisfy the demand, is there a risk that the companies will move away from serving actually these poor and vulnerable people? So maybe you can answer these questions, and then we'll get to others.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can start with the subsidy point first. I think for me, my personal view is that it's all about creating the market, and the subsidy should be there to accelerate the creation of a sustainable market. And to be able to do that, There needs to be competition, there needs to be consumer choice, there needs to be the ability for consumers to be unhappy, to shift, etc., etc. All those important elements of creating markets. So the only thing that makes sense to me is subsidies to consumers directly, where they have an increased affordability to then make the choice in the market, however they want to spend that money, to be able to get that energy access. And I would also argue, I know this is not something that's happening today, I think that the subsidies that are on the grid and off-grid in the future, I would hope that they also get combined, that the consumer can make that choice. Do they want a grid connection? Do they want a solar home system, etc.? That they have that sort of budget to do. But it's a bit of wishful thinking on my side right now, but I hope we can see something like that in the near future. On the new markets, it's very right. I mean, I remember when we expanded into DRC, it was our first market after Kenya and Rwanda, which are more sort of easier markets, traditional markets to raise capital for. And there was a lot of a pedigree of companies that had raised a bunch of money for doing different sorts of businesses in those markets. And how difficult it was to be able to enter DRC from a funding perspective, etc. It was 5-6 years ago. But our big realization is that once we managed to overcome that barrier, is that in a lot of underserved market, the consumer is more urban. Actually, you start with an urban customer first, and then you start going rural. So everyone has an energy problem. Versus in many more developed markets, like more mature markets, if I may say so, the problem becomes very rural. The urban environment might have a weak grid issue of varying degree, but people have energy. It's just that they're battling with the reliability of energy or cost of energy. Versus in some of these more fragile countries, no one has electricity. It becomes, I mean, you have cities with literally 1 million people not having access to electricity, which is quite devastating. So it was also getting the product mix right, so that what does an urban consumer need is very different from what a rural customer needs. And that became the starting point, because like when we looked at more less developed market, we looked at them as more urban opportunities. And that was the economic rationale for us to go in there. And when we looked at more developed market, we saw that as a distribution opportunity to access rural client. Then in terms of risk on focus, I mean, I don't think that's how, at least at Bbox, that's not how we think about it. We see ourselves as a platform where we have a system, we have a supply chain, we have a certain know-how and ability to finance. And then we look at each country, right? And then look at which are the demographics we should go after, right? And if you have a broad range of products and broad range of supply chain, in some markets, our focus is 100% rural. Example like Rwanda, right? In other markets, it's very mixed. Example Nigeria, like there's both urban and rural. So it depends on the market opportunity. And for us as well, as been expanded as we pay-go everything. We expanded into things like clean cooking. We've expanded into e-mobility. We've expanded into other things. And water pumps. Actually, water pumps is really interesting because it's a high capex item sold in rural areas, right? And it's a very different sort of from a capex perspective, it's nearly same as e-mobility, but the consumer is extremely rural, typically speaking. So I think that's not really how we think about it at Bbox, at least. We just look at each market and we look at which are the demographics where we could add value. I hope that answers your questions.
Yes, thanks a lot. And I'd like to sort of continue in this question about how we can enable, right, these markets to develop, and maybe go back to Mr. Jetani. I also saw you had your hand up before. So this question about financing, right, being an issue, and can you share your experience in terms of how governments can actually facilitate access to finance for this sector and for the users?
Yeah. So in India, the central government is giving finance in a big way. If I talk about the solar pump part, Mr. Mansoor has said this is capital intensive. So we are running a big scheme under which we are targeting to solarize 3.5 million agriculture pumps It's the world's largest scheme, I should say. And there we are providing 30% the cost from central government side and 30% from the state government side. So practically 60%. And some of the state governments are going ahead and giving more than 30%, sometimes up to 60%. So practically the farmer has to pay just 5 to 10% of the cost of the pump. Similarly, on the rooftop solar or the off-grid solutions, solar like so for solar street lights, solar study lamps, or solar power packs for the public institution like the primary health center or common service center in the village level, we are providing subsidy up to 90% of the cost. So this is a kind of subsidy that is being by the government. Of course, now we are thinking of providing subsidy for the other activities like livelihood activities. So there, the subsidy cap may be up to 50% or so for the initial application. Maybe say when we are saying that the total potential of such application is around 10 million. And then we may target initially say 10% of them, and thereafter as the economies of scale is there, then the cost of the equipment will also go down as that, and also the technology will also improve. So on R&D side also we are investing so that we get better efficiencies, robustness, reliable equipment. And also we are targeting on standardization and quality control, so that, as I said, that we have already have this big scheme to implement such a large scheme. Standardization and quality control is a crucial issue, and we are focusing on all these factors, wherein we are also incorporating remote monitoring. It means we can monitor all these equipments functioning through our online portal. So such kind of I would say we are the focus on the different activities, of course, and on finance side also. Apart from the giving subsidy, we are targeting to provide loan through say rural development banks. So we have a lot of rural development banks in and also targeting multilateral and bilateral institutions such as World Bank, ADB. So they are also giving concessional financing. Also, the green climate finance is also another option where we can get funding, and then the CTF, Clean Technology Fund, is also available. So these are the options available where we are targeting. Apart, as I said, apart from the government subsidy, the farmer share or the beneficiary share, we are targeting to get concessional financing from the other institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe to continue in the stream, McKenna, you're really looking into the barriers, right, for these productive use appliances, and financing and affordability, right, of them is a huge issue. What's from your research? What is emerging as the sort of pointers to move forward, you know, to make these appliances more available and more affordable for farmers in Africa as well?
Yeah, I mean, I really hear what Mr. Jitani and Mansoor have talked about, you know, bifurcating your market, targeting the right consumers, subsidies, you know, all those things come into play. But I think for productive use appliances, first of all, we have to recognize these are very expensive appliances targeted at very poor people. So at some point, we also have to come to conclusion, what percentage of that population would just not be able to afford them with a commercial approach, right? With an approach that is driven by the private sector. So it's the first question we have to ask ourselves. And then when we realize and we've segmented the market and we know who we are actually targeting with the private sector, then I think it's true. Subsidies are a great entry point. RBFs have proven really successful. The World Bank RBF, the SNV RBF, one that was enabled by Efficiency for Access Coalition as well. Those have really proved adept at, you know, increasing the number of sales that we've seen of solar water pumps, refrigerators, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think we can also think more flexibly than that, right? Beyond the RBF. It can also be about the technology. I talked about modularity, you know, meeting the consumer where they are with the technology that meets their need now, right? Do they need that big solar water pump, or could they grow into it? I think that's also something we need to look into as a sector. We need to sell the product that meets the consumer at the price point that they can afford right now. And I think that is possible. I think we also have to think creatively about how do we benefit from investing or cooperating with other parts of the sector. By this, I mean, for example, if we thought about, let's say, utility financing, so something we're experimenting with, could that increase the number of appliances that are being sold in a particular country, thereby bringing down the cost, and that benefits the entire sector, not just the utility, but it will also benefit the off-grid appliance sector. You know, if you reduce the price of solar water pumps because it's coupled with, you know, the grid, it reduces it for everybody. So I think we need to be creative and just not focus on what sector can deliver, or what the off-grid energy, you know, solar energy kits could deliver, but thinking beyond that. And in the vein of thinking beyond that, I think we also have to be very cognizant that productive use is niche. And it's niche and requires a huge enabling environment to make work. And so connecting with the agricultural sector, I think Mr. Jitanya has talked about that, connecting with the water sector. Other enablers that mean that we can get the person from the point of getting this appliance to generating value from that appliance. And that generation of value is a thing we have to guarantee if we are really going to make this dilemma of productive use work, where it's not affordable and therefore they can't make money and therefore they can't afford it, right? We have to unlock the value proposition, and that means working with others who can connect the dots that the energy sector alone cannot.
Thanks a lot. And this needs to work across the sectors, across the silos, I think is really important when we, in general, but when we look into productive uses, especially because sometimes we are just sort of stuck in our space. And I think this came out very clearly from Mr. Jatani's intervention as well. But I'd like to stay with the issue of affordability, but maybe switch from the productive uses to also households. I think as we progressing with electrification, right, the affordability, and we see this from the market trends report as well, will become bigger and bigger issue as we moving towards poor households, more rural, as Mansour said, in one context, but also, just poor households in fragile countries in general. I'd like to get your opinion about how can we make PAYGO more available for more customers, because it's clear from also the market trends report that if the PAYGO solutions are available, the affordability issue is much less than if people have to pay by cash. But in many places it's still difficult, right, to go to PAYGO. So question to both Tobias and Mansour, what do you see is needed both from the company perspective and from the financing perspective to make PAYGO solutions more available for more customers, which is also one of the questions from the Q&A. And sorry, before you go, so maybe we can start with Tobias and then Mansour. And Mansour, also there was a question whether the supply chain issues from China have been resolved. So maybe you can address that as well. And we'll be ready to close after that. So Tobias, you want to go first quickly?
Yeah, sure. No, I can quickly go first. So I think two things that we see and have in mind, and and potentially Mansour will echo it or not, but I think from an early stage company perspective, especially, supply chain and financing the receivables is the two main challenges that they're facing right now. So I think solutions that can reduce the effort of supply chain, pooling supply chain, reducing kind of the huge effort related to that. So bringing products in on time would definitely contribute to accelerating this, and offering more PAYGO and making it more affordable. On the financing side, I think an idea that we as Persistent are also starting to push out more and more is securitization or off-balance sheet financing, right, as part of the solution. And of course, what we've seen is that even larger companies are only starting to access it. And so we're trying to think through how can that be made more accessible to smaller companies as well, that could then offload the receivables and thus accelerate offering pay-as-you-go and making it more affordable to more customers quicker, right? Rather than always having to work on the own financing yourself or waiting to reach a massive scale, right? As some of the larger companies. And so what we're trying to promote or will start to try to promote is kind of a solar bank, for receivables, right? That could pool a lot of these smaller receivables and thus help also younger companies access that. Of course, also a topic that larger companies who are already there can hopefully accelerate that development. So also keen to hear Mansour's thoughts on that. But that would be my 2 quick thoughts, also given the time.
Mansour, 1 minute last observation from you on this.
I'll be very quick. I think one challenge with size is that when you have a loan book in the hundreds of millions of dollars, even a few percentage movement in utilization rate or credit performance has a huge impact. So one of the problems with, I think, all sort of a little bit bigger companies are facing is how to manage that sort of loan book risk. If there's sort of default insurance or off-balance sheet structures, etc., versus focusing on new customers. So I think there's a real tension point there, which needs to be solved to be able to unlock next scale. I agree with Tobias that there's a big role to play on off-balance sheet structure and receivable financing becoming more efficient, and there should also be more participants in that market as well. Still, the number of participants in the market are the typical ones, and I think that pool of capital needs to grow as well to create that competitive tension. Currency remains a huge challenge, especially if we talk about some of these fragile, more lesser developed markets. Currencies and ability to finance in local currencies and manage local currency is a huge challenge, right? Nigeria has a particularly different challenge of currency, right? So, and that costs money. So all in all, I think something that looks at risk managing existing loan portfolio, as something that helps accelerate competition for new receivables, and also something around managing currency would be a game changer. Supply chain, super quickly, it's more predictable, but still a problem. Longer lead times and more expensive. The net result is that you need more working capital. That working capital costs money. The end result is products less often, and products more expensive. And is it being reversed? In some categories, yes. In some categories, no. And we've had some productions being stopped for nearly 2 months because it's missing one component. And so that's the just-in-time diet, if I may say so, during COVID. And we sort of work at any time now, which is more expensive.
So thanks so much. I think we have to close now. So thanks a lot to a great panel. Thanks a lot to the audience for great questions. I think what I hear is that we still have lots of challenges we need to work on, but we also see progress in moving forward this sector. And I think that's really great as we are emerging from various crises. Just one quick reminder that this session is recorded and will be available to everyone who has participated. And also the report, when it is published, will be distributed to all participants. And I believe you will actually get it a day before everyone else in the world. So we value the time that you have spent with us, and be looking forward to more discussions, and hoping we will see many of you in Kigali, where we will also discuss the second part of the report, which is the outlook.
Thank you.